A homeless veteran walked into a diner on a cold, rainy night. He asked for nothing more than a cup of hot water and a scrap of leftover bread. But the waitress, a nameless young woman, placed before him a full, steaming dinner. And in that moment, she had no idea she was about to lose everything. She was fired on the spot. No one stood up for her. No one spoke out. The entire town turned its back. But the next day, 200 soldiers in full-dress uniform lined up outside the diner, not to demand a free meal, but to return the honor to the only person who didn't bow her head when the whole world chose silence. This story isn't about war. It's about quiet courage in everyday life. And the question, what would you do if your kindness was punished? That night, the sky over Foster Falls seemed torn apart by a winter storm. Rain lashed against the diner windows like the cries of wandering souls in the darkness. Inside a small diner called Maple and Ash, tucked away at the end of 9th Avenue, the dim fluorescent lights cast a pale glow across the cold tile floor. The clock read 8:43 p.m., but most of the tables sat empty. With rain like this, no one wanted to be out, say, except for those who had nowhere else to go. Hailey Morgan, 30 years old, had been working the night shift here for the past 3 months. Her brown hair was tied back neatly, her apron worn at the edges from too many hand washes, and her eyes, though tired, still held a quiet warmth. She was wiping down the counter with a damp cloth when the diner's old wooden door suddenly creaked open. A gust of cold wind swept in, carrying the scent of rain and a chill that pierced to the bone. Every remaining pair of eyes in the diner turned toward the entrance. Standing there was an old man, likely in his 70s, wearing a faded army jacket soaked through with rain, one sleeve torn to shreds. His white hair clung to his forehead, and a gray beard masked half his face. He walked with a limphous left leg dragging slightly, every step weighed down by a lifetime of memories. Hailey froze, not from fear, but because her heart clenched. The sight of that old man drenched, alone, standing under the dim lights like a ghost from the past, instantly reminded her of her father, Colonel Walter Morgan, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, the father who once returned home in a dust-covered uniform and who never came back after his final deployment. The old man said nothing. He just stood there, gripping a torn knit cap in his right hand, his gaze lowered, as if afraid that even his mere presence was forbidden in this place. A few customers looked down into their coffee cups, pretending not to notice. An elderly couple quietly slid their bill into the check holder. No one spoke. No one greeted him. Only Hailey stepped out from behind the counter. She approached him, the cloth still in her hand. "Can I help you, sir?" Her voice soft as mist. The old man bowed his head, still staring at the wet tiles. I was just hoping for a cup of hot water. And if there's maybe a piece of old bread." His voice trembled not from age, but from the humiliation of having to ask in a place surrounded by silent judgment. Hailey said nothing. In that instant, a memory surged through her, time her father once told her that on the battlefield, he nearly starved to death until an old woman in Kandahar gave him a handful of rice and a wordless smile. "Honor isn't the sound of cheering, sweetheart," he had said. "It's what you do when no one's watching." She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Under the heat lamp sat a plate of spicy roast chicken that had just been returned by a customer for being too peppery. Still untouched, still hot. Hailey plated the dish, added a few slices of buttered toast, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. She didn't ask permission. She just did the right thing. Carrying the tray, she placed it in front of the old man. "Just came back from a customer. Still hot. Coffee's on me." Hailey smiled, a calm resolve glowing in her eyes. The old man was stunned. He stammered, I don't have any money." "It's already paid for," she interrupted, still smiling. "Let's say you're having the rest of my father's meal." He looked up at her for the first time. And in that gaze, Hailey saw something the world had long forgotten. A man who was once a hero, now forced to shrink into the margins. When he picked up the fork, his frail fingers trembling, lifting each bite as if afraid to disturb the world, Hailey simply stood there, quietly watching. Her eyes burned, but she swallowed the tears. He looked up at her again. "You remind me of my wife. She used to believe that those who've known the cold deserve the warmest seat in the room." Before leaving, he pressed something cold into her hand. A worn-out dog tag. Its letters nearly faded. "My name is Marcus Turner," he said softly. "If I don't make it through this winter, at least someone will know I existed." Then he walked back into the rain. Hailey stood there for a long time, her hands still clenched around the tag. Its strange warmth lingered in her palm as if that small act had just altered something far bigger than she knew. But she didn't yet realize that the next morning, this entire town would be shaken awake by something never seen before in its history: the arrival of 200 soldiers coming only to meet her. The next morning, the sun had yet to rise. Heavy clouds blanketed the sky like a gray shroud cast over the entire town of Foster Falls. Inside Maple and Ash, the gloom thickened even more with the arrival of Donald Reese, the diner's owner. A man with a bulging belly, slicked back hair always greased with cheap gel, and eyes that never seemed to carry warmth. Donald showed up earlier than usual that day. Puffing on a cigar, he muttered under his breath about last month's plummeting revenue. As he passed the counter, his eyes immediately locked onto table 6, the same table where, just last night, the chair was still damp from the rain that clung to Marcus Turner's coat. On the table sat an empty plate, a drained coffee cup, and a napkin neatly folded. Donald scowled. He turned toward the kitchen and saw Hailey cleaning up dishes from the previous shift. She didn't look at him, but he strode right up to her, his glare sharp as a blade. "Did you serve someone last night?" he barked, each word hard and cold as metal. Hailey looked up unafraid, unwavering. "Yes, a veteran. He only asked for hot water. I saw there was a returned meal." "What the hell did you think you were doing?" Donald slammed the counter. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the quiet room. The handful of breakfast patrons flinched. A few looked up, then quickly dropped their eyes. "He didn't have any money, but I used my tip money to cover the coffee. The meal had already been." Donald cut her off. "This is a restaurant, not a charity shelter. What do you think our customers will say when they see us serving street trash? They'll think this place is a damn soup kitchen. You're ruining my brand with your bleeding heart nonsense." Hailey stood firm. Her voice was soft but steady. "He's a veteran, a human being." Donald stared her down. For a moment, his lips tightened, as if weighing something. Then, unable to restrain himself, he jabbed a finger toward the door. "You're fired. Immediately. Get out of my diner." Silence blanketed the room. Only the faint patter of rain on the tin roof and the clink of silverware from a distant table broke the stillness. No one stood. No one objected. No one said, "Wait." No one asked, "Why are you firing her?" Only silence. A silence more frightening than the storm outside. Hailey unfastened her apron. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine remained straight, her steps firm. She didn't beg. She didn't shout. She didn't lower her voice to apologize. As she reached the door, she heard a woman whisper from the far left corner, the elderly customer from before. "See? Let them in, and you bring trouble on yourself." A man across the room coughed and pretended to read the menu. Hailey stepped into the rain. Cold water soaked her hair, seeped into her thin canvas shoes. But she didn't open an umbrella. She just walked. She didn't cry. Not because she was hardened, but because in that moment, tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. She walked back to the small room behind the auto repair shop, a space barely the size of a public restroom, but the only one left after she'd had to part ways with her old apartment and roommate. Her one-eyed cat, Miso, leapt from the windowsill to greet her, brushing against her leg as if to say, "You still have me." Hailey dried off with an old towel, changed clothes, and sat on a thin mat on the floor. In her hand was Marcus Turner's dog tag. The metal was cold and scratched, but the faint letters remained. Turner, M, SN number F, 472. She held it tightly, as if it were the only thread connecting her to the reason she had just lost her job. No phone calls came, no text, no words of encouragement. In this world where everyone was too busy protecting their own safety, a single act of kindness could turn you into a threat. Hailey knew that, but she also knew something else. She wasn't wrong, and if she had to pay the price for seeing a human being through human eyes, then it was a price she was willing to pay. But what Hailey didn't know was that, as she sat in the dark, the cold dog tag resting in her palm, a phone call had already been made. From far away at a military base 200 miles from Foster Falls, a commanding voice spoke just 3 words over the line. Find that girl. Rain drizzled over Foster Falls all day. It wasn't heavy, but persistent like nature's cruel form of patience. It seeped into the pavement cracks, trickled through the broken shingles, and soaked the skin of those trying to survive in a town that seemed to have forgotten how to hope. Hailey sat by the tiny window of her rented room. The glass was fogged with condensation, but she didn't wipe it. There was nothing to see outside, just an oil-streaked parking lot, tattered billboards, and run-down houses reflected in puddles. She sat still, arms wrapped around Miso, her one-eyed cat, who was dozing on her lap. He breathed steadily, as if nothing had changed, as if the world was still whole as long as there was tuna and the warmth of a familiar hand. But for Hailey, everything had just collapsed. Her bank account, after last month's rent, held a grand total of $42.18. Her cracked old phone lay silent on the Tablano notifications. No check-ins. News of her firing hadn't hit the internet yet, but Hailey knew that sooner or later it would become gossip fodder on one of the local Foster Falls community Facebook groups. And when that happened, every chance at finding work in this town would vanish forever. She opened the fridge. Inside were a carton of expired milk, a shriveled apple, and a leftover sandwich from last week. She cut the sandwich in half own part for herself, the other for Miso. "We're splitting this. We're still surviving," she whispered. Miso chewed the stale bread like it was the finest feast of his life. Hailey smiled for the first time all day. She remembered something her father once carved into the wall of her old bedroom. "Keep your spine straight even when your heart wants to kneel." He'd said it just before leaving for his final mission. And now, it was the only thing keeping her upright in a world where good deeds always seemed to be punished. That afternoon, she began making calls in search of work. 3 calls, 3 rejections. One place was even polite enough to say, "We'd rather not get involved with what's been going around." She didn't even get to ask what was going around before the line went dead. Hailey opened her old laptop and started updating her resume. She knew full well that a modest work history and a glaring blank labeled "fired for feeding a homeless vet" wouldn't open many doors. But she still wrote. She still tried. It was during this moment that the window began to tremble not from wind, but from the ground itself. A faint rumble-like the distant approach of a convoy. She frowned. In this quiet town, even a passing truck could rattle the windows. But this was different. It felt rhythmic like drums, slow, deep, steady. She shook her head and turned back to the screen. Probably just her imagination. That evening, Hailey decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, partly to clear her mind, partly in the small hope of spotting a forgotten "now hiring" sign. She passed by Maple and Ash, the place that had once been her nightly anchor. Its warm yellow light still glowed inside, but the diner was nearly empty. She saw Donald Reese sitting behind the counter, hunched over, eyes glued to his phone. Table 6, the spot where Marcus Turner once sat, was empty now, as if no one had ever been there. No thank you, no news, as if it had never happened. Hailey stood outside the door for a few seconds. Then she moved on. A few streets later, she spotted a familiar figure curled beneath the awning of an old bookstore. The army green coat, the torn knit cap, and the hunched back were unmistakable. "Marcus Turner," Hailey approached. The bookstore owner inside gave her a silent nod, as if already used to the man sheltering there. She knelt down and gently placed a small paper bag in front of him. Inside was the other half of her sandwich and a neatly folded napkin. "I don't have much," she said softly. "But thank you for remembering me yesterday." Mr. Turner opened his eyes, blinked in mild confusion, then gave a slow, solemn nod. No words were needed. The silence between them became a quiet bridge, linking two strangers into allies in a world too loud and far too cold. Hailey walked away, unaware that just hours from now, her fate was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. Far away, hundreds of miles from Foster Falls, the Honor Guard Division of the United States Armed Forces was holding an emergency meeting. A 19-second video had just surfaced online, filmed from a hidden corner inside Maple and Ash. In the clip, a young woman stood alone in the diner as the owner yelled and fired her for giving a starving veteran a hot meal. That video had passed over thousands of comedy clips, and trending dancesto landed directly in the hands of those who wore the uniform. And one of THEMA commanding officer with eyes like steel had just given the order. "Mobilize!" Oh, 600 hours, Foster Falls. The next morning, just as Hailey woke up, her phone started buzzing nonstop, like someone was trying to jolt her out of a nightmare that hadn't ended. She looked at the screen. 42 notifications, messages, emails, messenger pings, even a few missed calls from unknown numbers. For a brief moment, she thought maybe someone was offering her a job. Hope sparked. Until she opened a link sent by an old friend, accompanied by a short message. "Hailey, you're going viral." The video popped up immediately. Low resolution, tilted angle, blurry. But the image was unmistakable. She was standing inside Maple and Ash, facing Donald Reese as he bellowed in rage. His voice echoed through the phone speakers. "This is not a charity. You're fired. Get out." Then came Hailey's Fastenot crying, not arguing. She simply took off her apron and walked out in silence. Around her, no one spoke. A few diners lowered their heads. A woman whispered something to her husband. A painfully quiet scene, and now, the entire world was watching. The clip had been uploaded to an anonymous TikTok account with the caption, "A waitress fired for feeding a homeless vet. What do you think?" In less than 6 hours, the video had amassed over 1.2 million views. But what stunned Hailey more were the comments. Not all of them were kind. Some were chillingly cold. Rules are rules. If everyone breaks them for feelings, society crumbles. Bet she's done this before. Probably been stealing food for months. She clearly broke the code. Deserved to be fired. Sad but stupid. Work is for following orders, not for emotional stunts. Even a few claiming to be former employees of Maple and Ash chimed in, accusing Hailey of being undisciplined or constantly doing extra to win customer approval. Friends began disappearing from her Facebook list. One sent a private message. "I know you meant well, but this time, Hailey, you went too far." She felt nothing, as if her entire body had gone numb, not from pain, but from disappointment. She opened another video, a faceless vlogger analyzing her story, with the title, "Kind Soul or Rule Breaker, When Kindness Gets Weaponized." People dissected her actions like a case study, clinical and cold. No one mentioned the old man. No one asked if he was truly hungry, cold, or if he'd really served in the military. All anyone cared about was this. Was she wrong? Among thousands of comments, Hailey found only a few that carried warmth. At least she did what was right. It's tragic that compassion is now punishable. We don't deserve to call ourselves a society if this is how we respond. She laughed. A joyless laugh. The internet was no place for the soft-hearted. She knew that. But when you become the symbol of something, whether good or bad, you're no longer a person. You're a target, a hashtag, a talking point for bored strangers to argue over. She tried applying to 3 restaurants nearby. The first let her speak nearly a full sentence before politely interrupting. "Sorry, you're Hailey Morgan, right? We can't afford any media backlash at the moment." The second didn't even let her through the door. The receptionist eyed her up and down, whispered something to the manager behind her, then turned back with sympathetic eyes. "We just filled all positions. Sorry." The third didn't even take her resume. They handed it back immediately with a smile. "Thanks for stopping by." Hailey walked out empty-handed. She wandered through downtown Foster Falls Place with little worth lingering for. An early open bar, a dying souvenir shop, a few convenience stores that never got busy. Passing the old bus station, she saw Mr. Marcus Turner, still sitting there. His head leaned against the wall, arms cradling a paper bag like it was his last treasure. He didn't notice her. Or maybe he no longer had the strength to notice the world at all. She gently placed a hand over her chest where his dog tag remained, tucked into her coat pocket. It had become part of her, not as a token, but as a reminder. Sometimes, the right thing is the thing that costs you the most. That night, Hailey returned to her room. She showered with cold water because the heater had broken. She ate instant noodles and half of the last apple. Then, for the first time in days, she opened her social media and posted a single line. "I'm not perfect, but I didn't turn away when a human needed to be treated like a human." No one interacted for the first 5 minutes, but someone saw it. Somewhere far away, hundreds of kilometers from Foster Falls, a high-ranking military officer was staring intently at that very post. Beside him lay a printed dossier on Hailey. Her name, address, current place of residence, and at the bottom, a single line, underlined in red, directly connected to veteran Marcus Turner. The officer said nothing. He stood, pulled on his gloves, put on his cap, then gave a nod to his aide. "We're heading to Foster Falls tomorrow morning." That night, Foster Falls lay in an eerie silence. No car horns. No sad bar tunes drifting from the corner pub. Even the wind seemed to know to keep quiet. And in that quiet darkness, 2 generations, one young woman who had lost everything, and one old soldier the world had all but forgotten, were about to meet in a moment that would never fade from the quiet history of this town. Hailey Morgan couldn't sleep. She sat on the thin mat pressed up against the window, where the street lamp cast a faint golden stripe across the wooden floor. Miso, her one-eyed cat, had long since curled into a ball, twitching gently in feline dreams. She reopened the clip that had sent her entire life into a spiral, but this time, she didn't watch it out of anger or disappointment. She watched it to understand what had really happened, and for the first time, she truly saw herself, not as the girl who got fired, not as the rule breaker the internet debated, but as a woman who had done the right thing, even when no one stood with her. And in that reflection, she saw no regret. She turned off her phone, pulled on her old coat, slipped her hand into the pocket, and felt the cold, familiar weight of the dog tag Mr. Turner had given her. And then something stirred inside her. She stood up, walked down the hallway to the first floor, opened the back door that led to the narrow alley behind the building. It hadn't started raining again, but the air was thick with moisture. Under the dim yellow streetlights, far down the alley, she saw a frail figure slumped against the brick wall beside the old bookstore that had closed the previous year. It was him, Marcus Turner. The army green coat was soaked in dew. The knit cap drooped over his brow. His thin hands clutched a torn paper bag like it was the last thing he owned. He sat motionless, eyes half closed, like someone drifting somewhere between sleep and surrender. Hailey walked over, her steps gentle, careful not to break the fragile silence surrounding him. "Mr. Turner," she whispered. "It's me, Hailey." He opened his eyes, looked at her for a few seconds. Then a faint spark lit in his gaze like a small fire flickering to life in the cold of night. No surprise, no confusion, just recognition, like a soldier spotting a long-lost comrade in the middle of a strange battlefield. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice rasped by age and cold. "I brought you something to eat," she said as she sat beside him. She opened a small paper bag. Inside was half of the sandwich she had saved from dinner, a slice of peeled apple, and a flower-embroidered napkin, the only thing her mother had ever taught her to fold before important meals. Mr. Turner looked at the food, then at her. His eyes said more than words ever could. He didn't take it immediately, just placed a hand on the sandwich, gently squeezed, then released it. "You shouldn't be near me," he said. "You're in the spotlight now. People think you're foolish." Hailey chuckled softly. "People think I'm stupid, delusional, emotional, irresponsible. The list's long, but not one person has called me kind." Silence. Mr. Turner nodded slowly. "Kindness is something people only praise in movies. In real life, it gets you fired, isolated, and humiliated." Then he looked her in the eye for the first time. "But it's what keeps you human." In that moment, Hailey realized he wasn't a weak old man. He was a former soldier rejected by the world, haunted by war, but still holding on to the dignity of someone who knew what honor used to mean. She pulled the dog tag from her pocket and gently placed it in his hand. "I can't keep this. It belongs to you." He shook his head. "I didn't give it to you to give back. I gave it so someone would remember I existed. And so others would remember you stood up." Hailey's throat tightened. But before she could respond, he reached into his coat and pulled out something else. A crumpled piece of paper. On it, handwritten words. "Matthew Turner, 1st Cavalry Division." "My son," he said. "If anyone ever asks, you can give them this." Hailey clutched the paper tightly and nodded. When she stood up, he remained seated, didn't ask for anything more, didn't apologize for the trouble he'd caused her. Just a proud old soldier still sitting upright, even if his left leg could no longer support him. She turned to leave. The tears only came once she was far enough away. Not from pity, but from sorrow for a society that forgets those who once gave everything to protect it. What she didn't know was that in a hotel just 3 blocks away, a man in a military uniform was standing at the window, gazing down at the town. In his hand was a printout of that video Hailey standing tall as Donald Reese pointed her toward the door. Her back straight, hairhead unbowed. Behind him, a young officer had just finished a call. "Unit is assembled, sir. 6:45 tomorrow morning, in front of Maple and Ash." That morning, dawn came slowly. The sun didn't quite rise, merely crept between thick layers of cloud, as if weighing whether the world was even worthy of its warmth. Foster Falls was still fast asleep. Shops remained shuttered, windows fogged over, and the main road lay empty, like a black and white frame from an old film reel. And then, 6:43 a.m., a low sound began to hum, not a siren, not the roar of truck engines. It was a steady, deep rumble like the heartbeat of something vast drawing near. From both ends of 9th Avenue, where the coffee shops met, the laundromat sleek black military SUVs began rolling in, one after another. No sirens, no announcements, just presences sharp, silent, and unnervingly precise. The first person to witness it was Mr. Andy, the auto repair shop owner. He dropped his coffee cup. Then Miss Leanne, the music teacher walking her dog, froze mid-step. She thought she was dreaming or watching a Hollywood film no one told her was being shot. Within 5 minutes, over 20 military vehicles had assembled in front of Maple and Ash. Doors opened. The first to step out was a tall officer. His U.S. Army uniform was pressed to perfection, medals glinting on his chest, white gloves gripping his cap. He stood with the posture of a man who'd never left the battlefield. Colonel Matthew Turner, the son of Marcus Turner. And he was not alone. From behind him, a long line of servicemen and women emerged. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. All in full dress uniforms, deep blue jackets, leather belts, boots polished to a mirror shine. They filed out, forming rows on either side of the diner's entrance. A grid sharp and solemn, like a funeral formation but brimming with life. No orders were shouted, no instructions given. They knew exactly what they had come to do. They were there for one reason only: to stand with the woman who did the right thing when the whole world turned its back. Word spread like wildfire. Text chains, private social media feeds, then public platforms. The townspeople of Foster Falls rushed out of their homes, phones in hand, filming a scene they never imagined witnessing in their own backyard. "What on earth is going on?" a little boy asked his mother. "They're here for the waitress who got fired yesterday," whispered the woman selling bread nearby. Inside Maple and Ash, Donald Reese, the owner, stood frozen behind the counter. He had just finished refilling the coffee machine when the doorbell rang a sharp metallic chime. Colonel Turner stepped inside. No introduction, no expression. Just his presence was enough to lower the temperature of the entire room. "I want to speak with the manager," he said, his voice low, calm, each word hitting like a nail driven into wood. Donald stammered, I'm the owner here." Colonel Turner walked slowly to the counter, removed his hat, and set it down without looking at the register, the menu, or anything else. He looked only at Donald with the gaze of a man who had marched through war zones and would not accept cowardice as an excuse for cruelty. "The man you threw out yesterday, Marcus Turner, my father." The room froze. Donald's mouth opened. No words came out. "He once saved my life and 11 others in Iraq. Took a bullet. Carried me 3 miles through gunfire before he collapsed. Refused medical attention until everyone else was safe. Then he pulled out a velvet box, opened it. Inside, the Silver Star, one of the highest honors awarded for valor in combat. This was his, but he sold it to buy food for a homeless family. And yesterday, my father was fed with respect by a waitress, while you treated him like garbage." Outside, cars had stopped. People were filming. Local reporters arrived. Hashtags like #Justice for Hailey and #We Remember Turner began trending on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. No one interrupted. No one looked away. They were witnessing a courtroom of honor without judge or jury. Colonel Turner finished with one sentence. "If yesterday, one woman stood tall when everyone else bowed, then today, we stand for her." He turned and nodded. From the formation outside, a young officer entered. He carried a small wooden box. Inside it, the very Silver Star Marcus had once sold, now restored, and returned to its rightful place. "We will present it to that girl." And with no further words, 200 soldiers snapped to attention, facing the street that led to the small boarding house where Hailey Morgan lived. A messenger had already been sent to bring her, because what was about to happen wasn't an apology, it was a recognition. That kindness is never small. The knock came at 7:06 a.m. Not hurried, not harsh, just 3 deliberate knocks, steady and measured like a command. Hailey Morgan was sitting at the table, eating a modest breakfast, a slice of dry bread and a cup of cold tea. She wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. She even assumed it might be the landlord coming to collect rent. But when she opened the door, it wasn't an annoyed landlord, nor was it anyone she recognized. Standing there was a reporter, a young woman with short hair, cheeks flushed from running. Behind her stood a cameraman and a soldier in full dress uniform. The soldier was the first to speak. "Are you Hailey Morgan?" Hailey nodded, her eyes guarded. The reporter jumped in. "They're waiting for you, the whole town. You need to come to Maple and Ash, right now." Hailey frowned. "They? The heroes?" The soldier answered, his voice deep and resolute, like a bugle call. "And a father." Hailey didn't fully understand, but she grabbed her coat, slipped Mr. Turner's dog tag into her pocket, and followed them. Miso, the one-eyed cat, leapt onto the windowsill, watching intently as if he somehow knew something big was about to happen. The drive took less than 5 minutes, but inside her, a storm brewed. Anxiety, doubt, and strangely peace. She didn't know what awaited her, but somewhere deep within, she knew. This wasn't another attack. The car stopped at the corner, and then Hailey saw it for the first time, the sight that had stunned the entire town for over an hour. She couldn't believe her eyes. Hundreds of soldiers standing in 2 perfect lines on the sidewalks outside the diner where she had been fired less than 48 hours ago. Each one in immaculate dress uniform, boots polished, white gloves, standing in solemn silence. They weren't talking. They weren't checking their phones. They were waiting, and they were waiting for her. The driver stopped the car and opened the door. Another soldier stepped forward, nodded respectfully, and opened Hailey's door with a courtesy no employer had ever shown her. Hailey stepped out. Every eye turned toward her. But no whispers, no murmurs, just the soft breeze and the sound of military boots against pavement. Then all at once 200 soldiers raised their hands to their brows, performing a synchronized United States Army salute. All of Foster Falls seemed to hold its breath. Hailey froze. She had dreamed of being recognized, of being thanked, of someone, anyone, saying, "You did the right thing." But she had never imagined this. A moment where battle-hardened veterans stood at attention to honor. A diner waitress, an ordinary woman, a woman once called a rule breaker, a woman who had lost everything over one hot meal for an old man. And now she was being honored by an entire military unit. Colonel Matthew Turner stepped forward from the ranks. He didn't need to speak, his eyes said it all. Respect, gratitude, atonement. Not just from him, but from a society that had once abandoned his father. In his hands was a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside was the silver Starth medal his father once earned, and quietly sold to feed another hungry family. Now, it had returned not to rest on the chest of the old soldier, but to be placed in the hands of the woman who had remembered him when the world had forgotten. "My father," Colonel Turner began, his voice rising like an oath before a flag, "once saved many lives, but it was you, Hailey Morgan, who saved him from being erased by this indifferent era." Hailey trembled. "I can't accept this. I only—" "No," Turner gently interrupted. "You did what many in uniform have forgotten. You protected a comrade's dignity." He placed the medal in her hands. A soft breeze stirred. Sniffles echoed from the crowd. An elderly man removed his hat and bowed. A young mother clutched her child and whispered, "Remember here." In that moment, Hailey was no longer the waitress who got fired. She became a living symbol of quiet courage. She clutched the medal not to boast, not for pride, but to preserve a piece of the story, a fragment of the old soldier who once pressed a cold piece of metal into her hand and whispered, "If I don't survive this winter, at least someone will know my name." Now the whole country knew his name, and they knew hers, too. As Hailey stepped away from that circle of honor, still clutching the box that held the silver star, it felt like time had stopped. But in truth, everything was just beginning. The ceremony ended in solemn silence. No drums, no speeches, no shouted slogans, just 200 soldiers each one quietly returning to their vehicles with perfect, unwavering formation. Their presence was like a silent earthquake leaving aftershocks across the town of Foster Falls. 8:17 a.m. Mainstream media began reporting. Breaking. 200 soldiers honor young waitress for her humanitarian act toward homeless veteran. 8:46 a.m. The hashtag number Hailey Morgan overtook number Monday Motivation as the top nationwide trend on Twitter. 9:12 a.m. Major outlets like CNN, Mississippi, NBC, Fox News, and even BBC picked up the story. And by 11 a.m., Maple and Ash's email server was overloaded. From across the country, order cancellations, boycotts, testimonias. People who had dined there began posting, "I saw the owner yelling at her. I stayed silent. I won't stay silent anymore." One Reddit user posted a photo of a receipt signed by Donald Reese, captioned, "I used to be a regular. Not anymore." 12:43 p.m. A group of veterans from a neighboring state stood outside the diner. They carried no weapons, only old jackets and photos of Hailey saluting the soldiers earlier that morning. A banner was raised. "Honor isn't dead. We remember." Donald Reese, the owner, tried to push back with a Facebook post. "I was set up by an unauthorized act from an employee. Our restaurant has policies, and I was simply enforcing them." The post was immediately flooded with reports. Within 2 hours, Maple and Ash's Facebook page was taken down. Suppliers from the bread company to soda distributors to coffee vendors began issuing termination notices, each one citing a similar reason: "We do not wish to associate with behavior that disrespects veterans and violates basic human decency." Former employees started posting their own stories about withheld wages, verbal abuse, forced unpaid overtime. Many of these went viral. Online, people called it the moral unmasking of a ruthless boss. Within 24 hours of that morning, Maple and Ash descended into internal chaos. One manager resigned. 2 chefs requested leave. The receptionist posted a status update. "The day I stayed silent was the day I betrayed myself." The silence they had once clung to now became a burden they couldn't carry. As for Hailey, she declined all interview requests. She didn't go on television. She made no public statements. She still lived in her small room above the auto repair shop, still fed miso with half a pouch of tuna, still washed dishes by hand because her faucet leaked. But something had changed. The entire town now looked at her differently. Children waved when she walked by. The newspaper boy left a handwritten note in her mailbox. "You're the light of this town." An elderly woman gave her a bag of apples. "I don't have much, but you have more kindness than this whole town combined." Then one day, a letter arrived, printed on thick paper, bordered in gold, with an emblem of the American flag. It was from the Valor Circle Foundation, an organization founded by veterans to protect the dignity and rights of those forgotten. The message read, "We respectfully invite Ms. Hailey Morgan to assume the role of executive manager at the newly established community kitchen in Foster Falls. This will serve those forgotten by society, but not by us. And we need someone who understands that, who has lived it. Someone like you." Hailey finished reading. She said nothing. She simply pulled out the old dog tag from her pocket, flipped it over the letters nearly faded. Turner, M, per SN number, F472, blood type, A+. And she whispered as if making a vow, "I'll continue, not to be thanked, but to prove that you were never forgotten." And so, while Maple and Ash hung a sign reading, "Temporarily closed due to internal restructuring," on the other side of town, inside an old warehouse that once stored broken vending machines, a light flickered on. The oven was fired up, the gas lines reconnected, and a wooden sign was mounted, carved with the words, "Ridgefield Community Kitchen, one meal, one hope." The first to step into the kitchen was Hailey Morgan, wearing rubber gloves, her hair tied back, and for the first time in days, a smile returned to her face. The days that followed in Foster Falls were unlike any season before. The sky remained gray, the streets still damp with nighttime mist, but the air had changed. It carried something both quiet and powerful. Maple and Ash had remained shut since the morning after the salute from 200 soldiers. Its once familiar wooden sign, "Open 24 hours," had been taken down, exposing the faded paint and dust-streaked window panes that now reflected only pale sunlight. Meanwhile, across town inside the abandoned warehouse that once stored old vending machines, a group of people worked at astonishing speed. They didn't wear military uniforms, but every movement bore the mark of discipline. They were veterans. Single mothers, high schoolers who had skipped class to help install stoves, paint walls, set up shelves, and haul in sacks of beans and rice into the walk-in freezer. At the center of it all, Hailey Morgan. She didn't give orders. She didn't lead with command. But everyone looked to her to set the rhythm. She scrubbed every shelf, washed every old pot, labeled every spice jar, as if rebuilding her trust in the world from zero. The grand opening was set for just 4 days later. They named it Ridgefield Community Kitchen. One meal, one hope. No red ribbons, no speeches. But when the doors opened, that morning more than 80 people were already waiting in line. The first was an elderly man pushing a cart by hand, next a young mother holding a child, her face gaunt. Then a skinny teenage boy with a torn backpack who nodded at Hailey as he approached. They didn't just come to eat. They came because they believed. Each meal served wasn't just chicken stew, bread, bean soup, or hot coffee. Each tray set down whispered, "You are not invisible." Hailey stood behind the kitchen counter, hair tied back, gloves on, a quiet smile on her face. No microphone, no grand introduction. But she was present like the head chef of hope. In one corner hung a wooden plaque, Mr. Marcus Turner's dog tag, alongside a photo of Hailey from the day 200 soldiers saluted her. Below the photo, handwritten words, "Honor isn't loud, it's quiet." And then the miracles began. On day 3, a 9th grade student named Emilio volunteered to wash dishes. On day 5, Ron, a 68-year-old retired military chef, arrived to teach everyone how to make his Marine Corps special beef stew. By day 7, a group of young mothers came to assist in the kitchen. Some peeled carrots. Others watched over children so the rest could help. Hailey turned no one away. She had just one rule. In this kitchen, no one is a charity case. Everyone is family. Local radio stations began reporting. A journalist wrote, "Foster Falls was once known for a meal that got a woman fired. Now, it's known for a meal that brought hundreds back into memory." As for Donald Reseth, former diner owner, he resurfaced weeks later with a brief notice. He was selling the Maple and Ash property. Rumors said he left the state entirely, fleeing the backlash from nationwide veterans groups. No one at the kitchen spoke his name, not out of forgetfulness, but because forgiveness is sometimes the quietest act of all. One Friday afternoon, just as Hailey was preparing to close for the day, a 10-year-old girl walked in, blonde, wearing an oversized hoodie. In her handsaw, a glass jar full of coins and a few crumpled $1 bills. She walked straight up to Hailey. "You're the lady who helped the veteran, right?" Hailey blinked. "Yes. How did you know about that?" "My grandpa was a Marine," the girl said. "I saw your video on YouTube. I want to help." She placed the jar on the counter. "This was my birthday money. I want to trade it for 10 meals. For people like Mr. Turner." Hailey lowered her head, hands gently gripping the jar. No thank you speech. No fanfare. Just one small act. And kindness had been passed on. That night, after everyone had gone home, Hailey sat alone. She opened the desk drawer and took out a small wooden box inside, the silver star and Mr. Marcus Turner's old dog tag. She stared at them for a long time, not as symbols, but as a living testament to a generation that sacrificed without applause, and to one ordinary woman who chose to stand tall when everyone else looked away. After 3 weeks in operation, Ridgefield Community Kitchen was no longer just a place for free meals. It had become a conduit of the human spirit. People didn't come here just hungry. They arrived carrying pieces of broken life, unsigned divorce papers, rejected job applications, dusty diplomas, or even just an apology they'd never had the courage to say out loud. And in that space among rusted pots, the scent of steaming cornbread and the soft crackle of stir-fried greens, people stopped feeling alone. Hailey Morgan no longer had to do it all herself. Around her bloomed a growing team of volunteers, veterans, high school students, single mothers, unemployed workers, retired chefs, even an older gay couple once labeled outsiders by the town now proudly managing the lemonade station. Each person brought a story, but once they entered the kitchen, they set aside their backstories to become the person who ladled soup, wiped tables, or divided portions of beans. Just that, and that was enough. As for Hailey, she remained the same. Quiet, devoted, no social media, no speeches. But everyone knew she was the soul of the place. The woman who once lost everything over one meal, now helping hundreds regain their dignity one tray at a time. A local newspaper described her with a single sentence. She doesn't wear an apron like a waitress anymore. Wears it like armor. She smiled when she read that, then rolled up her sleeves and went back to peeling onions. In the kitchen's corner, mounted on an exposed brick wall, hung a special wooden board where anyone could write what they were grateful for. A new line had just been added, written in marker. I used to think I was invisible, but she saw me. There was no signature. But Hailey didn't need to know who wrote it, because it no longer mattered. What mattered was that everyone wanted to leave something behind for this place. Not money, but real memories, true emotions, and genuine healing. One Wednesday afternoon, as the kitchen was winding down, a military vehicle pulled up outside. Hailey stepped out to greet them. The man who exited was Colonel Matthew Turner, no longer in uniform, but in a rolled-up shirt, face lined with age, yet eyes still sharp. Beside him stood a younger soldier, likely a medical officer, gently helping Marcus Turner walk, step by step, into the kitchen. Hailey froze. Marcus no longer wore his old tattered coat. He now had on a thick, clean sweater, new shoes, and neatly trimmed hair. But his eyes still bore the depth of someone who had seen too much war and too little kindness. Hailey ran forward, gently taking his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded, ever so slightly, as if afraid moving too fast might shatter the moment. Then he said, in that raspy, familiar voice, "For the first time in years, they called me Mr. Turner, not that homeless old man. And you're the reason why." Hailey didn't reply. She just held his hand still rough like the first time they met, but now warmer. Colonel Turner placed an envelope on the table. "This is confirmation from the Department of Veterans Affairs. My father will be transferred to long-term care, his own bed, his own doctor, and a legal guardian." Hailey opened the letter. Her vision blurred slightly. "And I want to do more," Matthew added, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out a check. "Valor Circle would like to fully fund this kitchen for the next 18 months. You won't need to worry about running out of gas or beans." Hailey shook her head, touched. "I don't need money. I need people." Matthew smiled. "Money brings people, but you'll keep them. We believe in you." That night, Marcus Turner sat at a back table, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes quietly followed Hailey's every move like a father watching his daughter cook her first dinner. And when she brought him a bowl of steaming soup this time, using his own recipe, he looked up, his eyes filled with something he'd only felt once before in his life. To be seen, to be understood, to be accepted. That night, Hailey didn't go back to her rented room. She slept at the kitchen not out of exhaustion, but because, for the first time, it felt like home. She opened the small wooden box that held the silver star and Marcus Turner's dog tag. The flashlight reflected off the metal surface. The letters were still faint, but she knew them by heart. Turner, M. Per SN number F472. Blood type A+. This time, she didn't whisper any prayer. She simply smiled, because now, the honor she once carried had finally returned to where it belonged. A week after Marcus Turner officially entered the Veteran Long-Term Care Center, the Ridgefield Community Kitchen still operated as usual, but the atmosphere had shifted. Busier, warmer, strangely, more peaceful than even the loudest five-star restaurants in the city. The people of Foster Falls had grown used to the line forming outside the kitchen as early as 6 a.m., just as they had grown used to seeing Hailey Morgan each day, always in that same faded canvas apron, hair tied up high, eyes slightly tired but always smiling. Hailey never spoke much, but her every action was like a quiet exclamation mark, declaring, "Kindness doesn't need fancy words." That day was a Tuesday. Nothing special, just an ordinary late afternoon early autumn chill beginning to settle in. The scent of buttered popcorn drifted in from the town hall nearby. A few young volunteers were clearing out the last trays, preparing to close. Hailey was at the dish station, hands still wet from soap, when she heard the doorbell chime. She looked up. A boy no older than 8 stood at the entrance. Light blonde hair, thin frame, bright eyes. He wore an oversized hoodie and slightly worn sneakers. In one hand, he held a neatly folded $1 bill. In the other, a cookie wrapped in wax paper and tied with red string. He walked slowly up to the counter, placed both items on the wooden surface, and looked up at Hailey. His voice was small but clear. "I saw you on YouTube. My grandpa was a soldier too. He says, if you've lived through a storm, you should help someone else find shelter." Hailey froze. The boy pointed to the dollar and cookie. "I want to use these to help someone like Mr. Turner." She didn't respond right away. Her throat tightened. Behind the counter, an older volunteer paused mid-scrub. A student gathering trays stopped moving. No one spoke. Everyone felt it. This moment, though, Small carried the weight of silent snowfall on an old roof. Not loud, but enough to blanket the world in white cleansing, softening, renewing it. Hailey leaned down, gently asking, "What's your name?" "Jonas," the boy replied. "Jonas," she said, placing her hand over her heart. "You just helped more than you know." Jonas gave a shy smile. Then he asked, "Can I write on that board? The one where people write what they're grateful for?" Hailey nodded. She handed him a blue marker. Jonas walked over to the wooden wall covered in hundreds of messages, from scribbled thoughts to heartfelt reflections. He wrote slowly, carefully, then set down the marker, waved goodbye, and slipped out the door like a soft breeze. Hailey walked over and read his message. It said, "I'm grateful that someone still sees other people." From that day on, Jonas's cookie and dollar were placed inside a small glass display box, next to the silver star and Marcus Turner's dog tag. Below it, a note read, "World-changing gifts don't always come in big packages." Every visitor to the kitchen saw the box. Many asked about it. Hailey would only say, "A boy thought he was small, but he was bigger than the flags flying over every big building." From that moment forward, the kitchen began receiving unusual gifts. An elderly woman dropped a gold bracelet into the donation jar. "I don't wear it anymore. Maybe it can buy vegetables." A veteran mailed a box of hand-knitted beanies with a note. "I don't march anymore, but I still want someone to stay warm." A 5th grader sent a poster that read, "Volunteering doesn't need a reason, just a heart." Hailey accepted them all. No fanfare. No posting online. Each item was logged, preserved, sometimes displayed like silent treasures from a society once prone to forgetting kindness. One late night, Hailey sat alone in the kitchen. She was restocking the spice rack while a small radio played soft jazz. She pulled out the dog tag from her pocket, an item that hadn't left her side since that day. She stared at it. But this Timonot to remember the man who'd opened a new chapter in her life. But to remind herself, when a kind act is punished, turn it into a torch. And then she walked over to the wooden board and wrote a new line in red marker. A message the next day's visitors would read, "I'm grateful that in a world full of voices, some still hear the silence." Not long after Jonas stepped into the kitchen with his cookie and $1 bill, life in Foster Falls seemed to regain its usual rhythm. Shops reopened. Children played ball on the sidewalks. Breakfast chatter at cafes no longer circled around the waitress who got fired. But weather this winter would be colder than the last. But there was one place that never returned to how it used to be: Ridgefield Community Kitchen. Each day, when the kitchen doors opened, it was as if another door inside the hearts of those who entered was being unlocked. People didn't come just to eat anymore. They came to sit together, to listen, to be seen, and most importantly, to remember who they were. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Hailey decided to visit Mr. Marcus Turner at the Veteran Care Center, located 15 minutes outside town. She brought with her a small gift basket, a box of butter cookies from Jonas, a hand-drawn picture by a student volunteer, a pouch of freshly roasted coffee beans done to the exact recipe Marcus once described. But the most important thing she carried was a light brown leather notebook, her Book of Honor, where Hailey recorded the stories no one ever asked about. The nurse on duty guided her to his room. The wooden door bore a simple plaque, "Marcus T., Room 204. Mr. Turner sat by the window, eyes half closed, hands resting on the armrest. His leather shoes were polished, his clothes freshly pressed, not for ceremony, but for dignity. When Hailey knocked softly, he opened his eyes. No surprise, No rush. Just a simple nod. You came. She sat beside him, unpacked the basket, and placed the items on a small table. Then she opened the leather notebook. I want to ask you something, she said. Not about war. About you. About the things no one ever thought to ask. He smiled. Someone finally wants to listen. And so they spoke for nearly an hour. Hailey didn't ask about blood, or guns, or nightmares. She asked, when did you first fall in love? Do you still remember your mother's kitchen? When was the last time you felt truly free? And with each question, Mr. Turner answered like peeling off old rusted armor worn for decades. He told stories about his late wife and her legendary fried chicken, about the time his son fell out of the apple tree trying to get the first fruit of the season, and about the dog he had to leave behind when he was deployed. People think soldiers only remember bullets, he said, but the deepest pain is leaving behind the ordinary things you never get to return to. Hailey wrote down everything, every word, every breath, every silence. From that day on, she visited him once a week. Each time, he shared a little more. Each time, she added another page. And the notebook began to grow not as a biography, but as a restoration of identity. Soon, others began sitting with him, young officers, nurses, even kitchen volunteers, after hearing about the old soldier who once carried his comrades under fire. They didn't ask him about victory. They asked, how do you stand back up when the whole world turns away? And he would always reply, don't wait for the world to see you. One person is enough. One day, Mr. Turner asked Hailey to bring him something. The dog tag he had once given her. She was surprised. Why? He smiled, frail but steady. I want you to keep it, not to remember me, but to remember there are others still waiting to be seen. And you're the one who must find them. She took it, and for the first time, she cried. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in her life, someone entrusted her with a mission, not a bill, not a shift, but a purpose. Back at the kitchen, she placed the dog tag in a small glass frame and hung it in the staff break room. Beneath it, she wrote in black ink, no one is invisible. No one is silent if someone is listening. Day by day, Ridgefield Community Kitchen welcomed new faces. No sign-ups. No explanations required. But everyone understood. This wasn't a place to receive charity. It was a place to share humanity. A single mother came for food for her 3 children. The next day, she returned with a bag of homegrown carrots for the kitchen. A broke college student asked to help in exchange for lunch. A week later, he became a full-time volunteer. A man who once despised Hailey for breaking the rules of her old job quietly left $100 in the donation jar with a note. I used to be part of the silence. Now I choose to speak. And Hailey? She no longer thought of herself as the girl who got fired for giving away a meal. She knew who she was now, a keeper of honor in the form of warm soup, a gaze without judgment, and a handshake that didn't care what coat you wore. At night, she sat alone at a corner table in the kitchen. She flipped through the notebook reading names, words, stories. It wasn't just a journal. It was a living documentance that this society had almost forgotten something. You don't need power to create change. You only need to not look away. 3 months after the day soldiers lined up in salute for Hailey Morgan outside the old diner, Foster Falls had changed not through new signs or city budgets, but through the way people treated each other. No one talked about Donald Reese anymore. Maple and Ash, after weeks of sitting abandoned, was converted into a small bookstore run by twin sisters with a free reading corner, where anyone could drop off a used book and take one in return if they needed it. On the shop's front window, a sheet of A4 paper was taped in the center. We don't care how much money you have. We care whether you need something to hold on to hope. The words were simple, but anyone who lived in Foster Falls knew. They were born from a rainy morning 3 months earlier. On the other side of town, Ridgefield Community Kitchen entered its 4th month of operation. The lines still formed steadily, even after the media had long moved on. Because this place didn't exist because of headlines. It lived because of the quiet consistency of kindness. Hailey was no longer breaking news. She had returned to her original essence. A woman with her hair tied back, rubber gloves on her hands, standing behind the stove, with eyes that listened and a heart that had never once shut its door. The difference now was, she no longer had to do it alone. Beside her stood people who had once walked in empty-handed, now ladling soup, writing the daily menu, collecting dishes, and washing them with smiles on their faces. Mrs. Francis, 73 years old, survived on government welfare. Now she stood at the kitchen entrance every morning, greeting each guest with one phrase, "Welcome home." Emilio, the student who once came just to escape his angry stepfather, now handled food inventory and was learning how to manage weekly supply chains. Even Miso, the cat now older still, lay in the windowsill, one eye alert, watching everything entering the kitchen as if he were an honorary officer. One early winter afternoon, Hailey received a package from another state. Inside was a hardcover photo book. Its title, Quiet Courage, The Hailey Morgan Story. It wasn't written by her, nor published by a major house. It had been created by a group of veterans. Inside were photos. Hailey serving soup to Mr. Turner, the 200 soldiers in salute, Jonas's handwriting on the wooden wall, and the many faces that had become stories, not just circumstances. On the last page was a handwritten letter. "We don't need monuments. We just need people like you to prove that honor never left. It simply needed someone to open the door so it could return." Hailey held the book to her chest, not from pride, but because she knew now she was not alone. One quiet Sunday morning, Hailey led a group of elementary students into the small room behind the kitchen, the room where she kept mementos. On the table, Mr. Turner's dog tag, Jonas's wax paper-wrapped cookie, now replaced with a wooden replica, a note of thanks from an anonymous elder, and a videotape of the soldier's salute 3 months ago. Hailey didn't lecture. She simply asked, "If tomorrow someone walks into this kitcheno name, no money, no words, what will you do?" One boy raised his hand. "I'll ask, do you like spicy food?" Laughter filled the room, but Hailey nodded, smiling deeper than at any point since the story began. That night, she sat again with her brown leather notebook, twice its original thickness, affectionately called The Book of Living Honor. She added a new line just beneath the name of Marcus Turner. He still lives in the chicken soup, in the red brick walls, in every direct gaze that greets a newcomer without making them bow. She flipped the page. Next came Jonas Age Astorni. Gift. $1, one cookie, and an act more powerful than 1,000 speeches. Then, Francis, the woman who opens the door with a smile. Emilio, keeper of leftover food and new chances. Miso, silent watch officer, without rank but full of grace. And finally, she wrote her own name. Hailey Morgan, the one who sees the invisible. As she closed the book, moonlight poured through the window, casting the reflection not just of her silhouette, but of everyone who had ever chosen to do the right thing when no one was watching. No applause. No medals. Just a heart quiet enough to listen, hands steady enough to keep going, and a kitchen whose door stayed open, like a heart that never locked. You might go your entire life without ever being welcomed by a line of saluting soldiers. You may never receive a glittering medal. No one may write a book about you. There might not be a single viral video with your name in it. But one day, if you see someone trembling in silence, if you catch a glance that avoids eye contact, a hand too afraid to be raised and ask for help, and if in that moment you choose not to look away, not to ignore, not to rush to judgment, then you are already part of this story. Because honor, as Marcus Turner once said, isn't about the cheering. It's the whisper inside your heart when no one is watching. In a world growing ever louder with arguments, quiet acts like Hailey Morgan's need no applause. And yet, they hold the power to move an entire nation. And the most beautiful part? Kindness never asked you to be perfect. It only asked you to be present. At the right time, in the right place. A smile, a meal, a simple nod, a kind question. A moment where you'd choose to stand tall, when it would be so easy to look down. The story of Hailey will eventually fade from trending lists. The video of the honor salute will get pushed down the feeds. But the people who were seen by her will never forget. And if you've ever been seen by someone right at the moment you thought you were invisible, then do that for the next person. Because somewhere, right now, someone is still standing in the rain, holding a paper bag in their arms, just wishing for one thing: to be treated like a human being.